4 weeks in the cycle. There's you're 4 different people. And I'm like, we're 30 different people. Okay. We're different every day. Like I would be training women harder in the first 2 weeks of their cycle. And I would be training them a bit easier in the last 2 weeks. Specifically, and especially that last week before the period is a better deload week for a specific athlete, or a better like rest and recover. They're going to feel more insular.
Welcome to the Captains and Coaches podcast, where we explore the art and science of leadership through the lens of athletics and beyond. I'm your host, Tex McQuilkin, and today we're joined by Kristin Weitzel for one of sports' most critical, and let's face it, potentially awkward conversations: how male coaches can better understand, support, and level up their female athletes. We cover the unique challenges male coaches face when working with young women, from understanding developmental differences, building trust, team dynamics, and creating supportive environments. And trust me, if you've ever wondered why your entire team seems to be having an emotional week all at the same time, Kristin's got your answers. I don't know, I blacked out. Stay tuned for actionable insights, real-world examples, and how to organize your practices and training sessions around, well, let's just say Mother Nature's game plan. We get awkward, we get real, because let's be honest, if you can't say menstruation without breaking into a cold sweat, this episode is definitely for you. With that, let's hand it off to Kristin. Ready, and break.
So happy to be here at Captains and Coaches, for real. Yeah, dear man that you are. Changing the world one athlete at a time. My peak expression in the world is to work across a couple different verticals. Do a lot in the breathwork and cold exposure space. That's growing more and more, especially when it comes to teams and universities. And I'm in the big throes of chatting with a lot of schools now around how we can utilize performance breathing for wins and for mental emotional stability, which we'll get into later. And I also work with a ton of women. That's what I've been doing for 7+ years, coaching females and leaning into all different ages and sizes and shapes and backgrounds in order to be able to coach them successfully and well into just life in general, right? But also sport and life as part of that. So
that's the reason I wanted to have this conversation.
Yeah.
I've heard you present, and then a lot of that information that you presented on was new to me, which we're going to highlight here. And I've got 5 sisters. I've coached female teams in college, high school girls, and then there's distinct moments where I felt ill-equipped to empower and take them to the next level, one of which a 14-year-old girl, volleyball player, club player. We were in the weight room and she was just sighing. I could just see this negative body language. So I tried to cheer her up and ask her what's going on, or, hey, what can I do for you? And she just sighed again and said, it's just so hard being a 14-year-old girl. And I just had to agree with her. Like, you're right. So these weights aren't going to lift themselves. Let's get back to it. I didn't know what to do. And then just working with Georgetown women's lacrosse, I had such a performance-based mindset and was so just like geared up for their moment that I knew they had in time. They didn't quite have the same value and appreciation. So there was a disconnect about how hard I wanted them to work, and then their belief of what hard work was. So when they were sore, I was excited, and they took that as an injury. It was just a misframing of how hard they worked. They viewed that as injury, and I botched that connection. I actually lost the team as a coach, just the inability for me to really connect with them. So had the program dialed in, however, it was that connection and empowerment that just lost. So a lot of the conversation we're going to have today, basically with sisters and teams, I've just earmuffs and pretended not to have or just ignore. But now I feel that we can have a good conversation to empower a lot of male athletes, working with teenage female athletes, college female athletes, and help empower them and take them to the next level versus just ignoring this and pretending a lot of this stuff doesn't exist.
I've always been able to kind of integrate with men very well. And there was a moment when I was working with Denison University swim team when I went to go, I think I've said this to you off camera, I went to go lead some breath and talk to them about nasal breathing and all of that. And I just really saw the drastic difference in relatability and motivation between the male athletes and the female. So we're talking about 18, 19-year-old to 21-year-old athletes, 40 men. I had them for an hour, a little over an hour, and then I had like lecture and then some breath work, and then 40 women. And I haven't had the men first, which was just an interesting entree because I was like giving out gold stars, like, gold star, like getting someone to make an answer and saying, all right, 2 claps for Tim. And the guys were like, yeah, and super excited about a clap or a gold star, which are just these like ethereal,
We're stupid.
like nothingness in a good way, and kind of cross motivating each other and being very linear. And that was like, it made it feel direct and easy. And I'm clear on the communication here and pretty outward on their end as well. If they were into what I was talking about or not, or if they had a question, it was like a relatively direct thing. Although sometimes male athletes will be like, I'm not going to say that I don't know. So sometimes you come across that. But that was, to me, that was like a big pivotal. That's only a few years back now. And I was really like, dang, there's a huge difference in this. The way I can be direct, the way I can communicate, and how much nuance and what I would say like roundness around working with women, right? And it's not a better or worse. It's just different styles, like management styles, right? You got to know your audience.
And then you also had experience working with female UFC fighter and stepping into her camp, where she was coached by males, and now you were a female coach stepping in.
Yeah.
So what was that environment like stepping into?
I mean, she's amazing. I think I learned, like you said, when you had it's like the first big pro athlete that I worked with, and I really learned over the training camp cycle working with her, like some beautiful things that I should not do as a coach. And, you're also talking about the world of MMA and UFC. There's a lot of coaches in the mix. Kristin was very excited to come in and share everything she knows, and just from a place of like camaraderie and collaboration. And also I knew my place in many ways, right? I'd never worked with someone in the UFC before. I got to see these like revered, amazing coaches who were coaching either strength and conditioning or what have you. But I'm also a biohacker, right? So I'm like, well, there's 3 other things we could be doing right here that your strength and conditioning coach isn't even talking about, which is like, I needed to understand that I'm never going to have as much experience in strength and conditioning for that vertical of sport as someone who's showing up having 15 plus years. And I was never trying to tell another coach what to do, but because I would make suggestions to the athlete that I would say in the long run, it got me in a little bit of like trouble because it creates confusion amongst the ranks, and nobody ever wants to feel like their toes are stepped on. And although I did talk to the other coaches sometimes, it just, what a beautiful lesson for me as a coach to navigate that situation. But the thing that I saw the most, which I want to touch on, is I know from working with female athletes of all kinds, whether that's professional or amateur or anything in between, that we need more recovery and rest. We just do. Hormonally, physically, we can even perform better in some cases by getting a little bit more rest than our male counterparts in the same sport. And when I looked a lot into the scenario with the UFC crew, I also could see that here's all of these men on the team, just a few handful of women. There's a whole nother layer in here of if you take more rest because it's frowned upon in the male athlete segment, like you're being lazy or you're not keeping up with the team, there is a mindset shift or there is a reputation shift that could happen. It didn't really happen with my athlete too much. She's a powerful hard worker, and he adheres. Professional athletes adhere to everything you say, which is the other piece. Like, be wary, they're going to do everything you say and then some. But there's this maladaptive training that exists across the landscape of professional fighting, and not just in my opinion. And like with Don Moxley and many of other people who have worked with wrestlers, UFC, MMA, all of this. So there's a maladaptive training piece that we need to learn to recover from, and we need to learn how to get our athletes to recover within the confines of how much recovery can we make work without anyone else on the team giving someone so much shit that they're going to then feel like they're not a part of it, and then that affects the mindset. So that was wild to see. And I always quote the study. There's a Diana Ball study that's out there that showcases, Dan Garner introduced it to me. He works with a ton of MMA and fighters in the UFC, boxers, all of it. Like when you have a female and you're coaching females, they did a study that was like Diana Ball. They brought a bunch of women in. They said, hey, we're going to give you Diana Ball, and we're going to give you this whole lecture for an hour on what testosterone does for the male body and how it helps them perform, grow more muscle mass, like really how that's helpful. And in the study, and I'm butchering a little bit of the details, but so they give a lecture and then they put these women on an 8-week cycle and said, we're giving you Dianabol and let's see Dianabol, which is a steroid, right? And let's see how the muscle progresses. And so the women, this one group who gets the Dianabol is like, okay, we know we have it. The other women are told, we don't know if we do or not.
Okay.
And the women who have Dianabol in their system, it's like they gain 42% more muscle than the non-group. And at the very end of the study, they gather everyone together and say, what we gave everyone placebo. So the point of this study is, and certainly I can send it to you so you can put it in the notes, that the power of belief for females is so strong that it's actually like chemically able to give them potentially, right? It's either neurochemically or it is like, I believe that I have more power, so I'm going to lean into working harder, thinking I can maybe, just maybe recover a little bit less, but just like I'm going to lean into working, I'm going to put the extra weights on, I'm going to go the extra mile in the training program to be able to like do this while I have this substance in me. And so whatever the notion is that's the underpinning of that, which you don't know unless you're like pulling bloods and doing mindset subjective tests every day, that still made them have gains up to 40%, which is wild, right? So it's like the lesson in that study is, and again, it's one study and it's a certain group of people and all the things, but the lesson continues to be, and I see this time and time again repeated, the power of belief for female athletes is way more potent than many times it can be with males. Doesn't mean it's not going to work with males, but women are really going to actively listen and feel into that, so belief and mindset is something that we really need to be able to champion with females.
Yeah. So I think before we dive deeper and get into the physiology, I think the mindset's a good place to sit because that is right out in front of us.
Yeah.
So what are some of the psychological differences between working with males and females? You mentioned the gold stars and how moronic men are. I concur.
I didn't use the word moronic.
I did. And versus the female athletes. So particular with the teenage, because a lot of the high school coaches that are listening to this or in the field, they're responsible for both male and female athletics, just depending on where the season goes.
Yeah.
So they can have a career within the high school setting. So like, what are some small adjustments based off your experience that coaches can be mindful and start to bring awareness to how they're communicating or just listening for how those female athletes are interacting?
I think the first thing is like just noting the difference of women really want to feel in a safe container, right? So if I'm speaking about when I'm gathering teams together, perhaps the men, I'm like putting them in rows and they're all in a thing and they're in front of a whiteboard and I'm like, writing on the whiteboard and it's just it's got some linear classroom style feel to it. But when I'm gathering a group of women, I'm going to either have it be like a softer structure that they're sitting in, or I'm going to put them in a circle, or I'm going to feel, and all of this can sound like kind of woo, or like maybe it sounds even silly to a coach, like can that really affect the difference? But like when you are sitting women in a circle or you're letting them sit in their little like clans of women groups that they're kind of forming within the team, there is a notion, as long as they're not too chitty-chatty with each other, there's a notion of safety in that. There's a notion of wanting to have their nervous systems feel safe so that they're not on guard, that you say something and then it rubs them the wrong way. And so even just like the way you are, gathering the females together can make a difference. Like what the environment is like. Are you if I have the option, I'm going to bring women into a room that has much more like ceiling and walls and like it's going to feel a little bit more confined in the sense of it creates more safety, right? And you don't always have that. You're at a pool environment, you're on a big field, you're outside, but we're taking in the landscape of everything neurochemically. We're wanting to make sure the village is okay, as you would imagine in the past when we were hunters and gatherers and whatnot. So how do we sort of let that landscape exist with everyone, all the females taking in each other and what's happening in the space, and how do I speak more softly, and how do I do the thing, especially if I'm a male coach. Women want to be seen, they want to be heard, and there's a fine line, as you know. If you open the platform for an entire female team to talk, you'll never get to practice. So how do you find the ways that you can have one-on-one experiences with people who need to be heard, and or the captains, or utilizing other women on the team if you're a man, to be able to sort of translate the message in a way that feels soft and that their opinions are being valued, right? Because far too often do I see like the firm hand, and I know that some females respond to that, but there is a notion of time. If they've been coached by a lot of men, they may have gotten a thicker skin. And because I remember in just my days as a younger athlete, if you would call me that, but in sport, I had nights where I would go home and like have a cry in the pillow until I got used to sort of how the male coach was. And then I had nights in my corporate job, even when the men on the team it was 18 men and me. And I was like, okay, I have to recalibrate myself to this structure, because my male boss would yell at me, and then 2 hours later he'd be like, we're all going to happy hour, and let's go. And I would think, but are you mad at me? And like there's that notion of we really will take things, generally speaking, more personally.
Maybe that tone can be brought once trust and rapport is established.
Yeah.
Versus leading with that.
Yeah.
And then keeping that until they adapt to it. They may maladapt, and then we've lost the athlete.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like that. Just changing the formation of the group. That's a simple way. Instead of the huddle up where we're getting close and tight together, now it's a circle, and we get an opportunity to where each person is viewed equally versus the team leader in front of the huddle.
Yeah.
Which is traditional for male sports.
Time out. Are you beat up, burnt out, and changing your workouts to what you think it's missing? If you're changing your own training program, I don't think it's the right training program for you. Give the Old Bull program a ride. It's a movement practice designed for the thinking man who's ready to train smarter, not just harder. We've eliminated your excuses by creating a flexible program that adapts to your schedule while intelligently addressing the wear and tear from years of grinding through poorly designed training. Each day offers options that honor your body's needs while still challenge you to grow stronger and look the part of a leader. Our programming systematically rebuilds your foundation, healing those beaten up shoulders, cranky hips, and stiff back that's holding you back. Join a community of lifelong athletes who've learned that sustainable progress comes through intelligent training. The Old Bull program, wisdom through movement. Click the link in the show notes for a 7-day free trial. Now, let's get back to the show. Ready, and ready.
How can a coach perform constructive feedback? Because a lot of the male perspective is it's humility, it's shame. So it's in front of the group, we're watching film, and you're getting made fun of. That is tradition.
Yeah.
So sometimes it leads up to like a busting chops way. So we're teasing until there's a moment of very constructive, pointed feedback.
Yeah.
So you lead the teasing up to the point where now it's targeted in front of the group.
Yeah.
So there's a lead up to that versus and this is a common saying a lot of people will connect with. Once a coach stops talking to you, that's how you know you really messed up.
Yeah.
Because they're not teasing you, they're not busting chops,
Yeah.
and they're not giving you coaching.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now how can a male coach effectively, maybe it's not appropriate to tease them and bust chops and give them a hard time. How can they effectively lead up to moments of constructive criticism?
Yeah.
Pointed feedback.
Yeah. And I think I want to underpin this by saying there are moments you have to have like tough love. There are moments you have to really rally someone to get out of their own way. And so I think there are clear moments that has to happen with a male coach to the female athlete for sure. And by no means do I think we need to like kid gloves or baby females in the space. It's just a different style of connection. A thing that I use even now, and I run this business called Sharper Breath and Cold, and I'm training instructors of all kinds. And the thing that I really love is, I'm not so much a nerd about studies, but like a lot of these beautiful studies about leadership have come into my life. And there was a big study at Harvard where they really analyzed like what happens with critiques and how people feel, even whether it's at the job or in a sport environment, getting critiqued. 80% of what we're getting critiqued on, we kind of already know. And some of the pieces of that, we're being way harder on ourselves. So where I think maybe this could apply to men, but I think with women, there is an opportunity for male coaches or any coaches with females to sort of set a precedent on the team to ask for, hey, what's something you love that really went right with that play or game or what have you, and what's something you would have liked to see yourself do better that would have benefited the overall team. And maybe it's like a quick fire round, right? Again, you don't want to be like, for 10 minutes we're going to talk about this, but let's just say you're showing tape, and then it's like, okay, Melody, tell me what you liked about what you just saw, and tell me what you might have done differently. And there's a really interesting empowerment that comes along with that. And what I find game changing is that people know, like they kind of know, right? And maybe not every component, but they know what they effed up, and they're like, you can give them 1 or 2 tips that the whole team then learns from. This is like a meta lesson. But if you get them to start the conversation, then it doesn't land so much like, oh, look what you just made, made this mistake, the whole team suffered,
Yeah, because now the film room, I made a mistake in the 3rd quarter. I'm not even paying attention. I'm just waiting till, okay, what's coach going to say?
But you're not paying attention to anything till you hit that part of the film.
Yeah, because you're not open to it, because it's become such a pointed, place.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
it's like the laces out moment. Laces out.
Yeah.
Where you're just concentrating on it.
Yeah. At least my high school football coaches were creating a bunch of Ray Finkles. But
yeah.
I have plenty of hilarious stories on that. So, yeah, but I like that empowerment where, what did you see here? Versus me telling you.
Yeah.
And then what would you do differently? Because now that's more in a position where we can shape that. And then whenever this moment comes up again in the future, I trust you to know what to do.
Somehow it like harkens back to the things like even in like CrossFit coaching, where you're coaching someone and you're like, this is what I see, this is what I want to see. It's just softer than saying, that sucked, try that pull again. Like it's softer in some way, or it at least gives a feeling that you're like wanting to hear what they have to say. And then maybe they get it right. Maybe they get what they got wrong right. And it makes your job as a coach like that much easier, because you can say, well, great point. And here's 2 other things I'd layer into that. It also makes people start to be better on a team when they're used to speaking about what they did that was good, and it doesn't have, it could be either one first or second, but like, what would you like to have changed? Notice the language I'm using. What might you have changed that would have supported the team better on that? And again, there's probably times to say, what do we think about what just happened in that clip that are a little more direct, but asking what do we think could be different, or what do we think went well when there's an opportunity to talk about that, also makes them, I think, better at getting constructive criticism or feedback from other people on the team, i.e. maybe the team captains or something, being more resonant to it. Imagine if you had that through line of that kind of a little bit of inquiry or active listening, male coaches, active listening, from the coach to the team captains all the way down to the team, and that you created that as the culture and your female athletes, it's just everything would move so much more smoothly.
The coaching culture, communication, and open to that. Yeah. That should be the goal first. It's not what you know as a coach. It's what you can get your team to understand, and then have them communicate across the board.
Yeah.
Let's start to dive into it. So I do want to spend some time with developmental differences.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, these are the earmuff moments where plenty of sisters.
I don't want to hear about periods.
That's the one. So, I mean, that high school age, everybody's going through different body changes. So now how can a male coach approach this? What are the biggest misconceptions for this stage of a female athlete's life that they may just be oblivious to? Yeah. It's important for them to understand for their development.
Yeah.
And their performance, their well-being, and just being a well-rounded athlete.
So let's just unpack the thing about the cycle, the monthly cycle, right? Because that's part of the biggest thing here when we're unpacking it, where male coaches are like, I don't know. I think we live in a world that I want everyone to feel comfortable, and more this is happening. But when I spoke in that room, it's like, as male coaches, and again, I'm going to tell you, and you're going to know that there are going to be specifics when maybe an institution is cultural or religious, or you can't ask about these things. And so I'm not talking about those types of schools or environments, etc. But don't be the male coach that is nervous to ask about, you have your period or whatever. Like, I know in general that males will be like, I don't want to ask because I don't want it to be like a pointed thing that maybe is inappropriate to say because you're crabby, so you must have your period, like, which is a total like oversimplification and misrepresentation. But finding the ways to ask and let the females on your team know that you're comfortable with that language or conversation is important from the get-go, because even if it feels awkward for them, so like my dad would try to have conversations with me about that and I would be like, okay, or like someone I would like know that was a man, and it's their language was awkward, my feeling was awkward. But if you set the stage to just speak about it plainly and I would say like clinically or physiologically in a way that's not using any slang or whatever, like, oh, you ladies are menstruating, or, whatever the language is, like women can handle the word period. And we're going to like from the ages of 12, 13, 14 till 50, 60, we're going to bleed once a month. Sorry, not sorry. That's like the most beautiful thing that we get to make children. And we have all these things. And I really feel like it's being brought in as like the fifth vital sign. It is something from a female athlete perspective. Women quite often are losing their period, right? They're going amenorrheic before a big game or race or whatever because they're overtraining. And so one of the goals, like even working with the UFC fighter, was how can we keep her period all the way up to her fight, right? Which isn't common. And if she's going to lose it, have it be like 1 month, but not amenorrheic for 6 months. Or like some of these athletes we find, they don't have their period for a year. Gymnasts, they're so lean and their body's in such a stressed state that it's like,
and the potential training culture that they're in, they're not allowed to say anything.
Totally.
So now it negatively affects their future reproductive abilities, I assume.
Well, it could for sure in 100 different ways. And then you have the other anomaly in all of this is just like when parents decide and or kids, because obviously we're not deciding as coaches, if a child or young athlete or collegiate athlete, etc., or a professional athlete in their own regard, or their own autonomy, they're going to decide I'm going on birth control, and then that's a whole nother thing that's going to shift the state of the body and the being, because birth control, if it's oral contraception, the way that it's pulsing in a body is like not actually giving a full hormonal cycle as it would happen naturally. It's mimicking little pulses of hormones every day. So that can like change the game again. So with all of this confusion, it's like, where do we start? And I think we start as coaches saying, hey, is there a way for me to present this in any way to the females on my team that feels comfortable for me? So the first thing you got to do is, if you're a male coach, before you even approach it, maybe start talking to some women in your personal life about their period so you can get comfortable with it in the region and the territory and whatever that you are. Have some conversation. And like every man out there who is dating a female should have an understanding and knowledge about where that woman is in her cycle. And the challenge with that is many women, when I'm like, what day are you? What day of the month is it? They're like, I don't know. I'm not tracking it. So more and more that's getting better. But get familiar with the language so that you're not walking in your first day trying on the new language for size with your female team or your female athletes. And then go to the place where you're finding a solution, i.e. maybe you're giving a big presentation about that. At some of the universities, they'll bring like the school psychologist in to just like be on hand, or maybe that's a woman. And then there's like some, interplay so that it feels like it's more comfortable. Maybe it's like an intake form that you just are like handing out to say, okay, we're going to talk about this because it's actually really important as a vital sign. And just going to get some insight on each of you all. If you know where you are in your monthly cycle, or if it's coming, you got to be careful though with young women, because if some of the women have their period on the team and some of them have not gotten it yet, there's this little, like, some women are proud of getting their period and excited and celebrating it, and some of them are embarrassed. So like when you play in that range of 11 to 14-year-olds, you probably have to be a little bit more cautious even so. And it might be more of a one-on-one intake conversation to just get them to check the box or not, so you know what's going on. Because it's going to give you insight into their emotionality if they've already begun to have that hormonal shift or not. So for everyone, it's going to be a little different. I'm super comfortable talking to women about where they are in their cycle and saying to females, hey, let me explain to you why it's a good idea to track where you are so we know, So that's...
I'm not, so...
I know, it's so sweet. As we're talking, you're like, I can feel it. You're like, comfortable, not comfortable, comfortable, not comfortable.
If you're watching on YouTube, this is not acting.
This is not acting. But it's so great. Like, imagine if you could say, if you knew, 24-hour testosterone cycle is so different, but imagine if you just knew that there's 1 week of the month that it made much more sense to do like the deload and your dry land training or your strength and conditioning for women.
Did want to cover that.
For a specific woman. Yeah, like imagine if you just knew for your athletes and there was like time that women felt energetically like, I can crush it right now. that woman is also going to be able, that female is going to be able to take harsh criticism during those 5 or 7 days of ovulation is when that would happen. We're ready to go out, we're powerful, we're good to negotiate, we're down, we're feeling confident. And so that's the time to have the tougher conversations. The challenge then becomes, even though there is this notion of women are going to start to cycle together, none of your women are ever going to be on the same cycle on the same day at the same time all at once.
But they're playing the same season schedule.
They're playing the same season schedule. And then, if we want to break down breathing, this important breathing piece that comes right out of Patrick McKeown, Breathing Cure is his book. He has 2 chapters on females and breathing. When there's a rise in progesterone, so just for all the men who are listening, typically it's like 2 phases. There's 4 weeks in a cycle. There's 4 phases, but a lot of times it's spoken about as 2, the follicular phase being the first 2 weeks and the ovulation in the middle of that, and then the luteal phase in the last 2 weeks. So a man in a white lab coat decided to say day 1 of a woman's cycle is when she bleeds. And I say that's a man in a white lab coat because a man needed to have some kind of representation outwardly to say, okay, you're bleeding, that's day 1, now we know how to count it. For women, I think we feel, generally speaking, like when we get our period, it's the end of our monthly cycle. So that's just like an interesting thing on how we feel in our bodies. But for clinically speaking, day 1, first day of bleed, that's the first day of your cycle. So just to put that out there, that begins the follicular phase, but you are in menstruation. It's good. He's holding on for dear life. I can tell. It's so great.
I know.
So you're in menstruation for
notes.
those first 3 to 5 days. It's amazing. And some women will have continued PMS, and they might feel crampy and they might feel crabby. And the healthier your athlete is, the more cleanly they're eating, the more they're getting rest, the less symptomatic they will be for PMS. So important. So first 3 to 5 days, day 1 to day 5 is probably menstruation. Could be 3 days, could be 5 days, could be a little longer, shorter, depending on the athlete. And that's part of the follicular phase. And then we ride up where there starts to be a big rise in estrogen, which is amazing. We go to ovulate, which is the time that we're fertile, which is usually 2 days or less. Oversimplification, but 2 days or less. Some women shorter, some women not many longer, but in there. And the real way we know is we're either tracking it through urine or blood, right? But we have a gauge on it being around day 14 or 16. That time of ovulation is confidence, good at negotiating, feeling really good in our bodies. We're mid-cycle. We don't feel bloated. We generally speaking, that's a powerful time for women, those 5-7 days. And the follicular phase feels more powerful than the back half of the cycle, which is the luteal phase, after we ovulate. It's
I'm
exciting,
misspelling
right?
all of this in my notes.
Luteal, yeah. Luteal, sometimes people say luteal. I don't, it's pronounced all over the place. But so Patrick McKeown, going back to this breathing thing, read a bunch of TMJ studies and a couple other studies that allude to the fact that the rise in progesterone, which happens in the back half of our cycle, so the luteal phase, I think he says about day 18 to 22 in the cycle, that because of the progesterone, there's a mechanism of action there, rising, there is less capacity, up to 25% less capacity for a woman to utilize CO2, meaning if CO2 is the vehicle with which we get oxygen into the body and the tissues in the brain, that means that we have up to a 25% less chance of oxygenating our system as well as the very same female athlete in the very same race day who's in maybe day 7 of their cycle, right? So it gives us a disadvantage. So this is why I always speak about the breathing practices we need to do, because we better be prepared if we're in a bad time, quote unquote, a lesser oxygenated time of our cycle than we might be when we face another athlete, which is insane, right? It's can you imagine with a full reproductive years hormonal cycle that shift happens? And Patrick might allude to the fact that because we're breathing more shallow or we need more air, we breathe more shallow, we breathe through the mouth. Because we breathe through the mouth more often, we lose touch with our pelvic floor, and then we feel crankier. We tend to get 45 to an hour less sleep during that part of the cycle. And then he would say, perhaps that's indicating some of the things that are coming up in PMS, right? Pain is starting, we're more sensitive, all of that happens in the body. So wild. I know it's a lot.
I'm overwhelmed just listening.
But it's amazing. And you're thank goodness I'm a man.
I know.
But it's a superpower because there are times that we can rest and there are times that we can feel really strong. And if we can sort of navigate a little bit of our training or give ourselves less shame, right? Hopefully we have no shame, but if we're as women or female athletes saying, hey, I know I'm feeling a little less strong and motivated right now, but that aligns really well with the fact that it's a couple days before my period. I'm sensitive, I'm not sleeping as well. Okay, great. Let me not be so hard on myself.
Well, yeah, if you can anticipate
Yeah.
the ebbs and the flows, then you can reframe it and then not feel the shame or disappointment because you didn't perform as well or train as
Yeah.
well, or I mean even sleep.
Yeah. And so can you imagine how great it would be if a male coach was like, hey, I really want to, and like, listen, people can call me. I will fly in and talk to the team with you there. If you can explain to the women without any pointed, finger pointing, why this is important that they're tracking their cycle and, giving them just a little bit of information, then the team is collectively thinking like, how does this help me be a more powerful athlete overall? Then it's sort of like an open playing field of positivity versus you walking up to a woman who's like crying in the locker room and being like, do you have your period? And just
It's
like, not
bound to happen
okay.
before, yeah.
Yeah, not okay. And if it doesn't happen direct to the athlete, it quite often happens with the one coach in the back room to the other coaches, or finding the assistant female coach and being like, Melody's really like upset and I don't know what to do. Can you check if she has her period? Like, it's just it's not always that simple, right? It's like Melody could feel 100 other things going on.
And then a lot of the high schoolers, they have, and colleges especially, probably more so colleges, but athletic trainers. So this is always a good buffer, depending on how big the school is. A lot of male, female athletic trainers.
Yeah.
So if you're a male head coach or strength coach, usually there's a female athletic trainer, at least
Somewhere
within
in the mix.
staff.
Yeah. Because of the locker room scenario. Yeah.
To help navigate the...
Yeah, and always pull that person in. And then also don't give that person too much grief if they're not, and they'll be familiar because they have their own cycle potentially, or they have had it. This isn't even a widespread thing always talked about with female coaches to female athletes. It comes up more and it's more managed because I think young female athletes are comfortable with an older female coach to say, oh my God, this is going on in my body, right? Because it's like-mindedness in the female physiology there.
A lot of the football coaches that I had in high school, they also coached one female sport a season. So then I recall one coach, he confided in me like how tough it was, just the stress of the situation, and he only had boys as a father. But then like even being a high school coach, because we had a skirt height rule for our public high school, so then like your arms had to be X amount of
like
inches.
To your fingertips or something. Yeah.
Like that. And then him as a fourth period teacher for a particular class was like, if they come into my class and I don't report them, I get in trouble. If I report them, I get in trouble because now I'm seeing the length of the skirt and their legs. So he was just like, I'm going to just ignore this.
And never.
And then that like perpetuated into him coaching. So just not easy for that environment, at least where I was. So this is helpful for, I mean, just getting comfortable and then leading with solutions and reframing and helping the females understand as well. Like this can be a mindset of power and opportunity, which I think will lead us to...
Yeah, your cycle is your superpower. What happens if you were a male coach and you stood up in front... Like, the younger women are, the more they're awkward to talk about it. But if you stood up in front of a university crew of female athletes and you said, I want to be clear, like, yeah, I'm Jack, welcome to your first day. I just want to be really clear. Like, I'm a firm believer in continuing to learn about female menstrual cycle and everything that is so beautiful about it. And it is really your superpower. And I want to check in with you guys, whether you tell me or you got your form or you do whatever, that you're tracking your cycle so you know when it is, because there's so many ways that we can utilize this for you to put more W's on the board.
In line with that, I think it's important to educate them as well, is not just say that. Like, what are some ways that to tailor the training program to really like elicit these responses on those big, powerful weeks that they have?
The first thing is like to think about mental, emotional. So if you really wanted to parse it down into, my friend Kayla is like, there's 4 weeks in the cycle. There's you're 4 different people. And I'm like, we're 30 different people. Okay. We're different every day. But if you want to parse it down to at least knowing that the first 2 weeks in a woman's cycle and the last 2 weeks, or maybe into 3 sex where it's like, if I'm in the first 2 weeks, but I'm not bleeding, or the last 2 weeks, but I'm not bleeding, and then the period as its own separate thing, then there's at least a continuity you can follow, which is like, I would be training women harder in the first 2 weeks of their cycle, and I would be training them a bit easier in the last 2 weeks, specifically, and especially that last week before the period is a better deload week for a specific athlete, or a better like rest and recover. They're going to feel more insular. Again, it doesn't mean don't do work, but it's probably not like max lift day. And so how can you, navigate that? Like, it would be amazing for a coach to be like, anyone who's in their follicular phase, this is the WOD. Anyone who's in the luteal phase, this is the WOD. I don't know if that will ever happen, but
Well, that's
it's real.
Yeah, that's I'm thinking of how to apply this in a college weight room setting, and then it wouldn't have to affect your training program. You just use an inherent periodization model, a rep max model, to where we're all working to our heaviest 8s, 5s, 3s. It's just, if you're at this stage, it's your heaviest 3.
Yeah.
It's just not going to be the same 3 as person number 2 on the team. So
Totally. Like, you're giving them a little bit of a, what is it, Prilepin's chart? You're like giving them a little lower percentage on that specific time of the month.
Yeah, I'd throw out percentages, because then there's potential for that shame following in there.
Yeah, true.
We're working up to our heaviest 3.
Yeah.
And then I've heard you say before, like asking what days you're on. I don't know if I'll go that far.
No, but you could say, if anyone who's in the luteal phase, back half of the cycle, there's plenty of ways to say it, as long as you've delineated what the semantics are across the team. Because if you don't clarify what you mean, and also you might mean one thing and the women are like, but this doesn't make sense because their moms or their sisters or whatever. So as long as you clarify the language and everybody's speaking the same language, then it's like amazing. Then it's like you get total comfortability across the coach and the team, and everyone being like, okay, high five, I'm on this group today.
Yeah. And then, I'm thinking even simplify it, like color code by phase. So then
You're going to make the period red, aren't you?
I literally wrote that on my notes. So then, yeah, if we're in red phase, then I'm arranging you on this part of the weight room, so that way I know how to approach you socially and emotionally. And then if it's, the power phase, then I got this group together, and then I'm coaching them a different way.
Yeah.
So now I can see how to just mix that up.
Yeah, and like finding names, it's like so beautiful that you said like maybe you have a power phase, and the follicular phase is when you're calling it the power phase, because that's when they have a bit more like power, authority, confidence, whatever, but you're not saying it's the confidence phase versus the non-confident, and you're not calling the back half like the soft phase, or whatever. Maybe it's just like the transition, or it's whatever you decide as a coach that makes sense. I think that can really work. And then there's some camaraderie there too, right? Women who are going to be in one phase of their cycle are gonna, maybe they're neurochemically going to be a little bit more aligned. It's never going to be exact, but a little bit more aligned. And then the biggest notion is, and this is something that I learned over time, I had a lot of conversation, and even with the women across all ages and landscapes, whether professional, collegiate, or just a recreational athlete, because I believe we're all athletes, but the women that I'm working with, it's like, how do I navigate working with them across all ages and stages so that they feel comfortable with where they're at, what the work is that they're doing, right? So how they can attenuate to where they are in their cycle. And for a very long period of time, and I believe a little differently now, I was training women really tightly according to their cycle, because there's lots of studies around the anti-catabolic nature of estrogen rising in the body in the first 2 weeks of the cycle, namely like days 7 to 16, and how can we use that anti-catabolic nature of estrogen on the rise to build more muscle, because there are studies that show like 44%, 22% more ability to put muscle on during that window. I think what it comes down to now is, because I interviewed Andy Galpin and talked about it, and he talked a little bit about it, but then was like tight-lipped, but just because he's a man and he knows all his shit, but he was like, go talk to Lauren Colenso Semple, who's a researcher on the East Coast, who's literally doing the toughest research that there is out there around women, because she's blood testing women who are coming in every day to see exactly what their hormone profile is doing while she tests these kinds of things. And she would say much to my surprise. And she was actually really happy that I was like, oh my God, I'm not doing it wrong, but I'm doing it too nuanced. That she would say there's still not enough data in what she's seeing to proof positive that that's real. But what is real is women's power of belief is so strong. And when we feel confident and we feel like ovulating, because we're designed when we're ovulating to like go out into the tribe and find and allure the men in because we want to make a baby, right? That's what we're designed to do. That's the thing. So when we're feeling empowered and we're feeling really confident, then we should potentially be out, living our best life, lifting the heaviest weights, doing those things. So it would make sense that even the mindset that's bolstered by the hormones, even if like the estrogen isn't as a powerful science or research study piece, that we're out there leaning in during those first 2 weeks. So we're going to put more muscle on because we're working harder, like you spoke to all the way in the beginning. Where are women working hard? Where are they selling themselves short? Which is another thing we should talk about. But
Well, we're getting there.
yeah, that first 2 weeks is really like an opportunity to, I think, put more muscle on. Whereas the back half, or maybe like the last week, is an opportunity to do more accessory movement, work on more mobility, mobilization, like all the lateral movement, whatever the thing is that you need as the athlete you are for the sport of context.
Yeah, and just from writing a program, like we need the demands. Movements are the demands of sport, so it's there. It's just adjusting the intensity, if you will, for the particular phase here.
Yeah, women used to say to me, does that mean I can just work out really, really hard the first 2 weeks and do nothing the last 2 weeks of the month? And I was like, no, that's not going to work.
No. And I feel it's important, like I mentioned earlier, the season schedule is set. So even though you're in your luteal?
Luteal, sure.
Luteal.
Yeah.
I wrote it as luteal phase, you're still going to have to step up to the plate.
Yeah. Yeah.
And do your best.
Yeah. And also saying, I think there's a moment, I think about what I would say in these instances in the heat of the moment of competition to an athlete. I might have a conversation with a woman that's like, yeah, we talked about this. Like your body hormonally is feeling like it's just not going to quite cut it in the same way. But the reality is like you have a mind and a breathing mechanic that can overcome that. We've worked on this to remind them that they're not at a deficit because they're in a different part of the cycle, right? And so I might say those things pending I've had connection the whole season to someone to be like, you got this, right? We don't do a lot of slapping each other on the ass in the women's locker room, but I think it's the same, you got this, that guys do when they're like, slapping each other in the locker room.
Hugging, touching butts. That's what guys do for team bonding.
Yeah, of course.
I want to get into the self-esteem. So this is where a male coach would just aim to say the positive thing, aim to say the right thing, and just try to drag them up. How can male coaches appropriately encourage self-confidence without just telling them and having the female athletes just not believe them?
It's like, I think about it like investing. People invest, like guys, I see my male friends sometimes like invest in crypto or whatever. They're like, I'm like, oh, they're risky. Like we are more risk averse as women in general. And so I see men being like, I want to invest in that. I'm going to do this. And at one point I went to Chris Kresser, who's like a fabulous medical doctor, functional medicine doctor. And I was like, Chris, I see everyone investing in all these different things. And I just wanted to like ask you, like, how did you know what to invest in? And and he's like, here's the real deal with men. There's always going to be one or two that actually really know what they're doing. But like Tony's just investing because Juan told them to. Like, and they're just like shooting from the hip. And women
like, what supplements you take?
Totally.
I'll take that.
Totally.
Don't do that.
Women are like more risk averse. So they're not going to like lean in that same way. We're going to wait and we're going to scan the landscape and we're going to say, okay, is it time for me to like put, it's like red light therapy on Ben Greenfield was like, red light therapy on my balls every day. And women are like, yeah, okay. Injecting peptides. Okay, let's just see how that plays out for a while before we lean into it. Knowing that women are going to be more risk averse just innately and really trying to speak to them from a place of their strong suits, really trying to speak to them an internalization versus external, and knowing that it's going to take a little bit more time to build up that athlete potentially. The one thing every male coach should really hear about women versus men, because men are just
morons, we've established it.
I mean, they're just male athletes tend to show up. Like, here's the thing. If I put a 400-pound barbell on a rack or on the floor, let's say, so we're being safe. And I tell, a 150-pound soaking wet guy to go pick up that barbell, he's probably going to try. And maybe one part of him thinks he can. And maybe he could, but, probably
There's
not.
a study, it's like, which can you survive a bear fight? I forget exactly what it is. But like, there's a list of animals, and then
And the guys are like checking off all of them.
all
And
the
most
ones
of
that
them
they
are
can
like,
beat in
yeah,
a
I can
fight.
do it.
Yeah, and America is by far the stupidest, but
But
I'll
this
dig
is
that
the
up.
thing is like, I'll go pull up, sure, I'll go pull the bar. Like, so men are going to overload a bar and be like, oh, I probably can lift that. And women are going to underload the bar and be like, I think that's about all I can do. That's common.
Uh-huh.
Men are going to walk into if you're a male coach too, men are going to walk in and you might, and again, I'm generalizing for all the people who are listening, but a male might come back to you after a really tough training session and be like, whoa, that was like gnarly. Like I was feeling that, coach. I was like, I kind of pushed myself. I think I stretched too far. They will not take, generally speaking, a victim stand on the way they talk to you about it. Women potentially will come to you and be like, coach, that practice was like too hard. You like pushed us too far. I got hurt because of what you prescribed in the workout.
Sore.
Really different, right? And so how do we set up the notion that they are autonomous of their own bodies, but also they need to grow them into being a little bit less risk averse, right? So all that is going on. And then the other big thing male coaches need to know is that mostly women are getting up in the morning or in the locker room and they're walking around, especially if it's a sport like gymnastics or something where you have to fit into a tight little outfit. And we are negative self-talking the shit out of ourselves. It is just innate, whether we talk about it being genetic or not, where it was socialized to be judging ourselves all the time against other women, against what we see in a magazine, against what we see on TV, against whatever, right? And while I'm not marginalizing that men may have that second guessing of themselves, especially just going through puberty and being like, how come Tony's got a full, it's happening with my nephew. There's guys on his hockey team at like 12, 13 that have like facial hair. And my nephew is still like, has this like high pitched voice and spiky hair and is like really soft features. And so how do we not, the judgments are going to always happen, self-judgment, but women are really doing it to a level that is, creating body dysmorphia, creating some like mental challenges when it comes to their mental health. That the comparison trap is like the thief of all their joy. So those things happening together, we need to continually be bolstering them. I think specifically from an internal, like, here's what you're doing really well. Women really respond well to compliments, not false compliments, and definitely not physical compliments, because as men, male coaches need to be careful.
Probably a line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So talking about the inside, talking about the way they're showing up for the team, talking about attitude, really getting their buy-in on the things they're doing well, that they're sharing that amongst the team can be super helpful to help kind of
and putting
build on
more
that.
value on that than
much
maybe
more.
the image.
Yeah, I mean, and you can walk into a male athlete locker room and like the least fit guy on the team who's like covered in pimples can just be like, I rock today. Like you just see that. You just don't see it as much with the women. Even if they're the strongest player on the team, they don't necessarily always know it.
Well, that they may feel shame on that because
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
I'm getting too strong.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I was put into advanced classes in middle school. Like they would move me up a grade for certain classes or put me in advanced classes. And I would tell all my guy friends and some of my other female friends that my mom wrote letters and made the teachers and the principal put me in those classes because I didn't want them to know that I was like doing well or so smart that I was being moved, because it was like ostracizing myself. I felt separate, and we all want to feel connection, right? So that example happens amongst the team all the time.
yeah.
Yeah.
What are some signs that coaches just they don't know what to look for? What are male coaches, they don't know what to look for. So what are some potential signs of the low self-esteem or the stories like the letter that you gave? So what are some examples that coaches can look for that may be signs of self-esteem trouble, which, if not addressed, could manifest in something even dangerous for their health?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the really obvious ones are going to be like with attitudinal stuff on the team. Like if there's a bit of bullying on like to someone else on the team, or a bit of like fostering into a clique of girls that's then potentially like either making fun of or busting chops of the other girls, like you're going to have two issues. You're going to have the person who's leading the one pack is actually navigating some kind of self-esteem thing, even if they have like rooster chest about it, because that's probably coming off of insecurity. And also they're not being very kind. And then there's another group of women, or maybe one particular person who's being singled out, and that person is, so there's some of that attitude on the team or that external stuff from other people, you're going to see it. The other thing that is, it will be obvious if you start to learn to read the people on your team as nervous systems in space before anything else. And by that, I just mean, you earlier were talking about posturally, you can see if someone's sort of in this, like they're feeling low about themselves, if they're sitting alone on the bench. I mean, there's emotionality that might come up, right? That's also an easy sign if someone's getting teary-eyed or choked up. Yeah, like dry mouth, sweaty hands. It'll mimic some of the feelings that would come up, could mimic what happens like before, like on a competition day, right? And so like noticing those signs and symptoms, crack in the throat when they talk to you, a lot of nervous energy, things like that can really be telltale. And that's, again, something that you learn over time of watching more and more women as nervous systems in space, and we're all awkward from those ages in so many ways. So it's going to present in different ways, but it's like, how do we look at the bodies in space to say what's the landscape of the people that are in front of me, as opposed to just looking at them as an athlete that's supposed to be completing a task, and at what pace are they completing the task, and what time, what's their performance. So how do we sort of take a little bit of a backseat and take in the landscape from a larger perspective of what that body's doing from a nervous system standpoint. And it's important because you as a coach can co-regulate with your athlete, right? Professionally and in an appropriate way. You can co-regulate by sitting with someone. Some of the better coaches I've ever worked with in my life, actually male coaches, if I was having like a moment of something, would just be like, yo, I'm going to sit right here next to you, right? And we're just, if you want to talk, I'm like, here, let's just spend 5 minutes, just vibing or thinking or breathing or just sitting up against this wall. It doesn't have to be some big like therapy session. To let the female athlete know, like, yo, I'm here, I got you. I'm not sitting in front of you or behind you. I'm just next to you. So it's very safe, right? There's no like, I'm going to stare at you until you tell me an answer. And making me feel like, okay, I can be comfortable. One specific coach, I was like, I'm going to sit here for 5 minutes. And there was like a CrossFit clock on the wall. And I sat there like a stubborn young woman for like 4 minutes and 45 seconds. And then I was like, finally broke down a little and talked to him and was like, oh, here's what's going on. Because I was like, I'm going to watch the clock for 5 minutes, whatever. But him just sitting there, disarming me and being real comfortable, just like by not saying anything and not feeling nervous, got me to be like, okay, I'm calming down a little bit emotionally. This is passing through me. I do want to say something. Am I nervous to say something? Yes. Wait another minute and then say something. There's a lot of this waiting game. Right? There's a lot of this, which has to happen sometimes at office hours or outside of practice, because we know how practice is, right? You have like 5 minutes to do each task.
It's important to empower the coach now to step in. So what are some signs, even connected with the menstrual cycle, the female triad, like those are the big buzzwords that male coaches learn when helping navigate health issues for female athletes. So
yeah, you want to talk a little bit about the female triad as you see it?
Yeah, like what are some, I guess, physical signs? Because I'm trying to remember from learning this in college, like there's an increase in performance when like eating disorders start to manifest. So then now their decisions are reinforced because their performance increases. But then
at the onset, there will typically be an increase in performance because there's a control mechanism that's changing their mindset, that they're like, wow, me starving myself out or binging and purging is actually working. I feel stronger because I feel like I'm really controlling the narrative, right? And perhaps nobody's noticing, so I'm getting away with it. And again, it's like none of it's like, these are all women just trying to control something because there are other uncontrollables in their life. And so there will be, at the onset, there could be like a performance increase, but this doesn't mean every athlete that has that. Perhaps you have an athlete that's really vibing with you as a coach and they're getting better. So noticing what's going on with the physicality, because there will be a drop off, especially if we're talking about food, right? Where there's not enough calories in the system and it starts to be like, they're not getting magnesium, they're not getting minerals and micronutrients, and they're like getting dark circles under their eyes, or they're not sleeping as well. I think feeling, having infighting with the team. This happens so much more with female athletes than it does with males. It's so interesting. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It's just women nitpicking on each other and kind of ganging up on each other and little things going on that are cliques and whatnot. So just like watching some of those groups, I also find that there have been several instances where women are kind of doing that in pacts. So like 3 of them, 4 of them have made a pact to eat less or to only eat at whatever 2-hour window and check in with each other. And so noticing that some of those things can go on the team. Yeah, and I think, you have to, as a coach, be watching female bodies. I know that there's this thing like you talked about with the skirt, that it's, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. But you can start to see when malnutrition happens, like in the face, in the skin tone, in the color of the
So
eyes.
yeah, that's what to look for as well. And then, I mean, it's easy with males, like we're going to weigh in. And this is, again, maybe this is important part of the conversation, because with male athletes, we're going to weigh in when we walk in the weight room, and then we're going to weigh in when we check out, especially during summer training, because now we can see hydration levels, and it's feedback for them to say, hey, I'm not drinking enough water because I lost 3 pounds during this workout. Now, I would be just holding back and say, no, we're not going to weigh our female athletes because I'm too afraid of connecting weight to this and then causing something I don't understand.
Yeah.
So like, I mean, but educating the importance of weight and hydration versus weight and what the rest of the world thinks weight is.
Yeah, for sure. Weight and hydration, and weight and protein, meaning weight and muscle mass.
Oh, yeah.
Get the explanation about here's what 5 pounds of muscle looks like and here's what 5 pounds of fat looks like.
That's a good one.
And understanding that it's like tighter, leaner, smaller, and you could still weigh more and be fitter than you were before, right? Like you could be in a smaller frame and also have more weight, so that it doesn't. This is why I'm not in charge of all the weigh and stuff that happens with coaches typically, right? But when I am in charge of it, I put women in like DEXAs or on like in body scans, because what I want to do is create the understanding. And people still panic about body fat percentage, but I want to be like, what's the lean muscle mass that's on you? How is everything feeling from a bone density standpoint? I want to celebrate the things to be celebrated. And some schools don't have the budget to do that. They're just like, get on the scale, check in with your metrics, right? So I think it's like we do the best we can do. I have definitely still been in the situation where I'm presenting on nutrition because I'm like a nutrition specialist, so I can do all that, and talking about getting the right protein content because that is so important. And I'm like, even if female athletes are suffering from other things, I want them to have the right protein. And then being accused on the back end by someone who's already with body dysmorphia and an eating disorder, being accused on the back end that I'm telling them what to eat and it's more than they want and it feels not okay. And probably in the back of their mind, they think I'm going to make them fat with what I've told them, right? That's the notion in their mind. And so you can continue to do it as kindly as you can and as professionally as you can. And there still may be things that show up. And you know this more than I do, which is, you want to be able to rely on parents, and then often you end up battling the parents, or the parents have a different notion, or they're not seeing what's going on, or parents can be a win and parents can be a challenge. So it just depends on what's going on in the home life as well, or if they believe that their daughter is starving themselves out or not. And there's lots of tricks, like many teams will put out snacks, so you could very easily just be like, who's not going for the snacks at all, who's not drinking anything. If you come across anything that feels or looks like diet pills, diuretics, I mean, I've been through that in my life where I'm just like, I will just take so many diuretics that I would be like stuck in a house for Friday and Saturday because I think, well, I'll be lighter by Sunday. It's not cute, the things that people do, right? But the reality is like all of that stuff is happening, so you got to just have your eyeballs open to it.
Especially with weight class sports.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah, we don't sit in the back of the class with tinfoil and 8 sweatsuits and spit in a soda can. We're just like,
morons
I'm going to stop eating.
So parental involvement, this is important. So I guess what role do you feel parents play in the developmental changes for female athletes? Should they be having these conversations? It's not safe to assume that they're getting it at home.
It's not safe to assume they're getting it at home. And I want to say that every parent should have that conversation, even if it's 2 dads or 2 moms or a triumvirate, or they don't know anything about it. They should be having, this is a should. I'm shoulding all over parents. Who am I to tell them what they do with their kids? But if we don't educate our own children, and if you're out, especially if you're learning about this in a podcast and you're coaching and you have kids, this is a prime opportunity to be able to talk about, I want parents to speak openly about sport, about food and nutrition, about menstrual cycle, monthly cycle, reproduction, sex, all of it. I want that in the home. I just don't think it's always happening. And it's not always the parents' fault. Maybe their parents didn't talk to them about it. Maybe it's cultural. There's a number of things. So we have to somehow institute to the best of our ability. This is why I think it's so great when schools have a school psychologist who does like a cultural meeting or does a psychology meeting with the team a couple times a month. It's just a check-in, and maybe it's someone who's really trusted by the team to have conversations so that they know they can go to someone if there's no one else, right? And to fill that parental gap. And we want that as coaches. We want them to come to us, but are they going to always? No. And so the short answer is yes, I want parents to be educating on that. And maybe the parents don't know that 1 gram of protein to 1 gram of body weight is the answer. So then how can we educate them? And how can we, with some kids' gloves, let parents know, hey, there's a little orange flag that maybe there's some things going on without, making the parents feel like we're butting in or.
Yeah. And
It's a dance.
it is a dance. I think that education is an opportunity to start a conversation, and then maybe educating the girl dads on what to look for.
Totally.
So then that could help a lot, especially with expectations.
Yeah.
I had an awesome conversation with psychiatrist Brad Kennington, episode 12.
Cool.
Yeah, but he talked about the family dynamic and sport. Parents project on athletes, parents project on coaches, kids project on parents naturally, and then kids project up to coach, especially if it's a female athlete and a male coach, just the family dynamic there. So understanding what is going on in the household, maybe you don't have a clear channel of communication there, or aiming to educate on expectations or even bodily functions, etc.
Yeah.
That the dad may just be playing earmuffs to. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there, and I feel education can help bridge the gap, which was motivation for this episode. I do want to speak to performance. So I do have online training, program called Old Bull, and I got some bells on there. I don't want to insult the women on there, so referring to them as bells. So breath.
BELLES. Yeah, love it.
So there's an opportunity here because how I operate is it's a choose your own adventure. You can organize and select which workout to do on which day, and within there are rep schemes. So it's certain movements have rep schemes. If you're feeling this today, you're going to go for 6 to 10 or 10 to 15 or etc. So give them the opportunity. If they're feeling it today, I want you green light, go.
Yeah.
So now I feel a lot of this conversation has helped put them in a position to target which rep schemes they're going for.
Yeah.
So I guess from respect to what we've talked about thus far, to the older female athletes with kids, life, stress, and still continuing to train hard, like what else changes within respect to what we've talked about here now for our more experienced female athlete with life?
I think it's really nice that you're dividing it and giving some division and some choose your own adventure, because I think that's much needed, right? Women specifically, we're not so great all the time at sort of self-assessing or interoceptive awareness, just like laying down for 5 minutes and be like, what's going on in my body? I see this a lot when I put women in the cold, that they're not even realizing how stressed they are until they get in the cold, and then they like have a cry and they're like, I don't even know why that came up. Well, you're an entrepreneur with 120 employees and 3 kids, and your husband's off on his business trip, and it's like, it's obvious to me, but it's we're all holding it so much. So what do we sort of need for that day, for like, where is our allostatic load, our current stress level, versus what do we need to be applying as a minimum effective dose of stress, whether it be like training or ice or breath or whatever it might be, strength and conditioning, so that we feel like we've succeeded for the day. And sometimes it's not an ice bath I put someone in. It's like, go do a hot bath. Like, you need to chill. But when it comes to training, and especially I see this as women are getting older as well, because we have this like probably putting a little too little weight on the bar, right? Unless we're like highly coached in a good way for a number of years, we underserve ourselves. And so a lot of women show up to me and they're just going to always be doing like 15, 20 reps of something that's too light. And I think, when I'm tired, I'd rather put up 5 to 8 reps of really heavy weight to see if I can just like nail that and be done versus multiple reps. I think, you can slice it a lot of different ways, but the way that we lose quite often is by not putting enough. We're not racking enough. And so if you can do your 5 to 8 reps and rack more, then rack more. If I have one more woman, like I have 30-year-old women that come to me that are like, it's all downhill from here. And I'm like, okay, no, none of that's real. What we see, there's research. What we see is that people just eat more crap and are more sedentary as they get older. And so how do we make sure that we're fighting against that? And I interviewed Dr. Stacy Sims, who's like a pivotal endurance athlete and researcher and doctor who just like gets it. And the number one thing she's like, lean in. You have to lift heavy shit. That's her like tagline, lift heavy shit, women, because that's where we're at. And I think that that's not just for women as they're aging. I think it's when we have these high school or collegiate athletes, of course, we're as coaches going to make sure that people are safe or spotted, but really getting women to reframe how they're lifting in a way that's like, could you add the 5 more pounds on each side? Could you, like, cheering them on and making it be sort of like an adventure or fun or an experience? Because I think what that underpinning of that is that women don't want to, like, we don't want to fail. Like, there's that failure thing where I think that fail faster mentality, like with men, they're just like, oh, okay, tomorrow, I'll come back again tomorrow. There's something that can, again, with the risks they're willing to take, they're like, okay, the more we learn how to fail at things, and that includes weightlifting, the better we get faster, right? This is like an old Tony Hsieh from Zappos thing. It's like, how do we fail faster so we get real comfortable at it? A woman, her name escapes me, wrote this book on fear. She's an like ex-pro athlete, adventure seeker, phenom. I'll send you the book
That's
name.
how I want to be defined.
Yeah, she's like
Adventure
wild. And
seeking
she's like,
phenom.
our problem is fear. We step back from it. I want to teach people how to say, oh, that feels scary, or here's this fear that's rising. I want to go chase fear to see how I can, navigate it or bolster it, or to see where I'm where I'm lying to myself, that it actually wasn't even something that was that scary, but I've set up this whole story in my psyche how it's scary. So I think the biggest thing, just coming back to like all the athletes when it comes to lifting weights, and you see this all the time, the stronger a female athlete gets, the more she can, let's say she puts up 20 pounds more than she ever expected that week she could. You walk away, like you get out from under that bar, you walk away and you're like, damn, I can do more than I thought. Like there's a level of confidence and self-assuredness and self-esteem that lives in the body then, that's completely physicalized, and that bleeds right into the world, right? Into their jobs, into schooling, into everything else that's going on, right? Study faster, get better grades, all those things can happen because they're feeling more self-assured about it. So at any age, and when I deal with women that are like perimenopausal, menopausal, it's like, stop saying you can't do this stuff anymore. Like maybe you're doing master's weight at your CrossFit thing or whatever, but go and lift it, go and do the thing. It's like not time to give up on yourself because we have so much capacity. And chances are they're just like not eating enough protein and not taking care of themselves with sleep. So
we'll finish on that note then.
Big wins.
What's the protein recommendation? 1 gram per pound body weight?
Yeah, I would say for anyone who's like up to like a 25-year-old, 1 gram per pound of body weight, 1 gram of protein. I always mistranslate it when it's in, we're in imperial, but when we get to metric. But I also think, I know that as women age, as men and women age, we need more protein too. So you start to get 40 plus, you need to be upping your protein intake even more because the body is not absorbing it as well, utilizing it as well, all of that. So like they say as aging population 14 to 70 or whatever, maybe it's like 1.5 grams of protein. Like we're working towards that. And I don't really believe in like you can eat too much protein. I run out of hunger where I'm like, I just can't eat anymore before I run out of like, oh, I need to get, 3x protein in my body. So good for you, so satiating, so it helps you with sleep, helps you with, recomp your body. It's the number one macronutrient I always lean into.
Oh yeah, big fans of protein over here.
Yeah.
All right, we've covered a lot of bases.
We covered a lot. I know.
How can people learn more about your work or reach out to you if they want to learn more or dive deeper into some of our topics here?
Yeah, for sure. So this famed word biohacking. So I have an Instagram handle. I answer my own DMs just for any questions off the cuff. It's like biohacking.breath.cold. That's the best way to kind of find me if you're just like, I have a quick question, I don't know what this is, or you want more context. And then sherpabreathandcold.com is all my performance breathing, cold adaptation work, all the things we're doing with sports and university teams in that regard. I try to stay in my lane, and I do coach some nutrition and some female cycle stuff too. And then wellpower.life is where I'm working with women, typically amateur athletes, like let's say 30 to 60 years old. And Wellpower is the program that I work with those women, so they feel a little less intimidated by all the athletics.
Yeah. And empowered to take on their task.
Yeah.
I learned a lot. I took a lot of notes.
You
feel
did. It's
more
great.
confident.
Yeah.
And then how I would manage a weight room to then optimize and then aim to just break down any social barriers so that way they feel empowered, and then puts them in a position where you step on the field and then it's ready.
Yeah. And if anyone's listening and super nerdy about this, like I put together 6 or 7 slides that I've shared with a few universities, coaches, athletic directors that are just like on female performance. And I'm like, I'm happy to just like fire those off to anyone who's like, yeah, here's my email. I really want those, because I want us to be able to all do this together, right? Like I'm one person. I can't get to every school, every coach, every team. It's like the more that I can empower male coaches specifically to get out and get after it with these female athletes, the better that we all end up, right? Then more W's on the board.
That's it.
Yeah.
And going pro, it's something other than sports in life, and you still maintain the confidence and a healthy relationship with weight training, fitness, eating meat, all the good stuff.
Yeah, love it.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Well, awkward ending to the show, but thank you.
Bye.
Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Captains and Coaches podcast. Be sure to give Kristin a follow and reach out if you have any questions about the information we provided. She's got an amazing presentation out there that sums it up with beautiful displays, slides, and all that good stuff. If you like this episode, you like the show, be sure to subscribe, give us a rating and review, and look for new episodes every Wednesday. We'll see you next time. Bye.